Hello, everyone. I am Ben Pick, and I am doing this live again for the first time in 2 weeks. So, hey, yeah, I was on vacation last week, and I got a nice little pre-recorded episode all about Reedsy. If you want, you can check it out. And I was at the beach, so it was all nice and relaxed. I had a lot of fun with my family. I got to hang out, play lots of video games, eat lots of great food. Eat. I only had one thing of ice cream, but one thing of soft serve ice cream. I had a bunch of other ice cream and cake, and we were celebrating birthdays. Anyways, my point being that I was well rested, and then today is Monday, and I'm back at work, and oh boy, yeah, there were only a couple hundred emails, and most of them were things I didn't need to take care of. A couple of things. A couple of times my coworkers actually covered for me because they, things were being requested and they're like, well, he's out, so we'll deal with it when he gets back. And that was today. So, hey. Also, thank you everyone for joining in. Eloise, thank you for taking over for Richard and being the first to be in here. You were awesome. Yeah. And Richard, thanks for joining in. Adapting from around since a little bit. There is a little bit there. But it's also just the writing style in general, because I know somebody like you specifically is not a big fan of Dune, and Dune is definitely a relic of the dawn of science fiction. So I'm trying to discern whether or not the Chronicles of Prydain could be written today. And thank you, Andy, for joining in. Awesome. No, I am not doing the countdown. Since you all complain so much, I'm no longer doing that. So, hey, you get faster time with me, I guess. But before we get started, I wanted to bring these out, which are my, I got the full set. So we have, I have these now out of order because you'll see why in a second, but I got the first book in the Chronicles of Prydain. This is the book of 3. I was holding this while running around and I hit the curb when I was a kid. So the book actually caught my hand. There's blood in these pages actually, since I didn't do a good job of patching myself up. Then we got the third book, The Castle of Lyre, and we got the fourth book, Terran Wander, which I think has a part of it which is kind of falling. Yeah. So you can tell that this this series has been through a lot. So I probably should get maybe newer versions. But then the second book, the Black Cauldron, is the yearly Newbery Award. So it's the award-winning version. So it's got a little bit more on the front, and it sort of stands out. And then because I lost it in a move, I don't know how that happens, how I could lose one of the books. So we have a hardcover of the final book, The High King. So you have these 4, none of which look alike, only 3 of which look alike. So we have the first, second stands out, third, fourth, and then we have the 5th book right here. So these are my copies of the books. Hey, Lauren, thank you for joining us. Yes, of course. So on the one hand, it would be nice to replace these so they all match. And on the other hand, I like these versions. So there is that. Also, Andy is clearly trolling. He says that Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9 were better than 4, 5, 6. Andy, all I can say is, it just must suck to be wrong. Because, objectively, measurably, in every sense of the word, that is 100% erroneous and false. Now, let's get started. So, I've talked about my favorite novels and the ones which shaped me as both a reader and a writer. One of my earliest fantasy reads is Lord Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, specifically the first book, the Book of 3. I'll get into what the series is all about, but think of it crudely like the Lord of the Rings for kids. This came out in the 60s, so, it would have been, 20, I feel like it's 20, maybe 25 years after the Lord of the Rings would come out. So that math sort of checks out. And I'm going to raise the important question. Could this book be written today, and what would need to be updated to make it happen? Well, maybe. Obviously, anything could be written at any time. So let's get that out of the way and look at whether this would be a critical success if it were released today. So the Chronicles of Prydain follows the adventures of a young boy. You got Terran, assistant pig keeper Terran of Caer Dalben. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing all that wrong. This series I've only read, so my pronunciations are only how I read things in my head. There was a movie. The movie was loosely based on the second book. It almost single-handedly ruined Disney's animation department. So the movie's not good. In fact, that is one of the many reboots that I think should be done again. So give it a second chance to tell at least a part of this story. So maybe not, maybe just the Book of Three, or maybe they could redo the Black Cauldron because that one has a lot of interesting things. But my point being that I'm not usually a fan of reboots because reboots try and redo something that was already fantastic to begin with. So you're just capitalizing on nostalgia. I think a better reboot will be to redo something or to try again when you miss the mark. So, anyways, we're following this young boy as he grows into a man and fights evil, the power that's trying to take over the land. Boy starts on a farm, a very remote area of the European style setting. So this is your typical European fantasy story. And he takes care of a pig that can see the future. This little piggy right here. He dreams of going off on adventures until he gets swept up in them. The main cast, you got Taryn, like I mentioned. You also have Ilan Wei, who is a princess of the same age. She's got some innate magical abilities. You have Flunder Flam, who's an old bard with a tendency to lie. I mean, stretch the truth. And when he does so, he has a magic harp that he plays. And whenever he tells a lie, the strings break. And then there's Gurgi, who is a hairy semi-human. Let me see if I can show him. There we go. Semi-human creature who has an incredible heart. And the Black Cauldron, the Disney movie, made him out to be kind of like a dog, but he's more human-like than animal, I guess. You might think of him like the not the Abominable Snowman, Sasquatch. He's like a Sasquatch who isn't giant or monstrous, so like a frail Sasquatch, or like a child Sasquatch. And they do feel a bit stereotypical. You know, you have your wandering hero who dreams of adventure. You have your princess of magical power. You have your elderly sage type person, but he's kind of comical. But the series came out in the 1960s, and it set the standard for what will become the stereotypes. So a lot of the stereotypes that were included in this are stereotypes kind of because of this. So put another way, the Chronicles of Prydain created the blueprints that countless fantasy series would follow. More than that, and like I mentioned, the books share roots, the same Celtic roots with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And while both are separate bodies of work, they do feel similar because they share that common inspiration. You know, you have a group of unlikely heroes who band together to fight off some evil force, and the evil force has a whole bunch of orcs, undead, monsters, terrifying creatures that are all under their control. In much the same way that the Wheel of Time can kind of feel like the Lord of the Rings. And it's not as bad as the Mr. Bean looking over and copying the writings of the person next to him, you know, that meme. But there are some commonalities between the Chronicles of Prydain and the Lord of the Rings, more so than, say, the Wheel of Time and the Lord of the Rings. That being said, the themes, the characters, the plot, the storytelling mechanics all feel different. Primarily because this is targeted at kids, whereas the Lord of the Rings is, I guess, more of a teenage audience. But the point I'm trying to make here is that any modern Lord of the Rings clone or story influenced by the Lord of the Rings may also feel similar to the Chronicles of Prydain. So it would be more difficult for this book to stand out, at least in the modern era. Now, what makes this series unique, especially back in the 1960s? Well, I will get back to that in just a second. Oh, Buttercup. Hey, Nicole, thank you for joining us. And fun story, there is actually a book called Board of the Rings, and I did not like that at all. It was like not another teen movie for the Lord of the Rings, and it just tried too hard to be fun. Uh, Richard, you are jumping the gun, but I would say absolutely wholeheartedly yes. This is 200 pages, and the font's fairly big. It reads, there's nothing wrong with an adult going back and reading books intended for children. I mean, I would pick up a Goosebumps or an Animorphs and still enjoy it as I would today. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a fun series. So, sure, adds to cart. Good job, Richard. But you can try just reading the first book first. And if you like the characters, if you like the setting, then keep going with the series because it really goes to some incredible emotional highs with the culmination of the High King. And these are bite sized. So, I was on vacation a lot. I did a lot of traveling as a kid. So I would bring like one of these and finish them in a day. And so this is a wonderful series to read for the car. Thank you. Thank you. You are giving me more specifics on Nicole. So yeah, the Chronicles are technically for middle grade readers, but I don't think a lot of preteens could read them unless they're advanced. Really? That's interesting because I definitely would have been reading this one at. I think I picked up the Book of Three as maybe a 10-year-old, maybe a 9-year-old. Either way, definitely by 10, I was reading this book and loving it. So sure. I don't know what that says about me, my childhood, or anything, or if that's whatever. But yeah, I guess I'm not getting slapped. No, you don't need to get slapped, Andy. You're just wrong. Okay. Nicole's giving us more information. I used to tutor and run a tutoring center, and they were at least 5 grades below the reading level. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of a bookworm as a kid. Little nerdy kid growing up in Columbia, Maryland. So yeah, I was fascinated by the written word. Let's just say that. Okay, that's a little bit different. I don't know. I never actually read I Am Legend, but if it's I know it's not like the movie, but if it's anything like the movie, which is really dumb to say, I don't know. I would have been bored with I Am Legend, but yeah. Yeah, what was I in? I was in 5th grade when I brought the Doom book, not Dune, Doom, Doom, into elementary school because I was reading that, and I know for a fact that I was in 5th grade. And there were definitely some NSFW scenes in there, which were really awkward to read as a 5th grader. But I'm sure I wasn't emotionally scarred or anything like that from those. Of course, I played Doom as a kid, and again, yeah, this is going to come off really badly, but child of divorce right here, and so I was kind of an ass with working the system. And if I knew something was like too mature for my grade, for my age, I would just talk to my dad about it and he'd be like, all right, whatever. And so, yeah, I was definitely playing Doom by, I don't know, maybe 11, 12, certainly by 12. Um, I was also playing, yeah, it was really fun. I was playing Myst, the Logical World of Zoombinis, and Doom and SimCity simultaneously. And let's see, Logical World of Zoombinis is like this cartoonish thing where you're trying to get these little defenseless, essentially lemmings from one point to another, and you solve logic puzzles to do it. That is the definition of a kid's game, even though it gets really, really difficult in later levels. Doom is obviously ultra violent. SimCity is all about management, and Myst is just absurdly difficult for a child. I had like the book guide sitting next to the computer while reading through it, and I was still not able to do things. Not able to do things correctly. So even with even as a kid with a guide, I couldn't beat Myst. And yeah, see, perfectly normal to be a 12-year-old playing Doom, and probably younger than that too. So fun times. All right. Oh yeah. Sorry. Bootleg copies of GTA. Yeah, we had those on our calculators. It was a lot of fun. There was also, what was it, Drug Wars or some stupid thing where you just like, it was basically just a marketing game where you would buy products at low prices and then sell them for higher prices on your on your. It was really dumb. It was like GTA Lite. Anyways, Rambling aside, what makes the Chronicles of Prydain unique, especially back in the 1960s? In the first few novels, primarily, the introduction and let's see here. So, Book of Three, Black Cauldron, and Through the Castle of Lyre, which Castle of Lyre focuses mainly on the female protagonist of the group. But the primary female character, Elamwe, she's adept at magic and has a lot of agency going from the first book to the third. And she accomplishes a lot in her own right. This is really surprising given how the series was published again in the 60s. So the first book, I mean, she spends the entire time just making fun of the main character and saying like, oh, you're doing everything the more difficult way. Like it's fun teasing back and forth, but it's definitely like, elbowing someone in the ribs. And then by the third book, she goes off with her aunt to become an accomplished wizard, but her accomplished sorcerer, witch, whatever you want to call it. But her aunt is, you can see by the cover, she looks kind of evil. It's very much like a Tangled scenario where the aunt is trying to use the niece or the person they have essentially kidnapped and captured to perform magic. So, yeah, very interesting. And towards that end, Elamwe becomes less interesting in the final two books. She has some great moments in the High King, don't get me wrong, but she goes from being this individual character to being a love interest and object of desire. And again, the concluding moments of the High King are absolutely heartwarming, and all of the heroes' resolves and the final decisions they decide to make at the end of the series are absolutely touching and meaningful for all of their growth, and it brings a lot of weight for everything that happened before this. So, that is the goal. When I'm in the middle of a series, I want to try and write a series conclusion that has as much depth and growth as this book did. But again, the choices Elamwe makes, as well as that of the hero, Taryn, are impressive for a children's novel, especially when you get to the end. And I won't spoil anything, but the series does give a lot of weight to every decision and every sentence and every promise that the hero makes. So their own words kind of drive their actions, which is really impressive to see for, events much earlier in the series, how they come to fruition in the end. And again, those final moments, they really do hit hard. And if you haven't given the series a shot, it's well worth it. But the Chronicles of Prydain feel like a tropey, typical high fantasy series because this book helped create those fundamentals. And we're still seeing those modernized in today's writing. Now, the villain, again, is a big bad named Aaron, who is the standard evil lord. Sorry. The standard evil lord who has a tendency to raise the dead to bolster their army. Over the 5 books, the series matures as its characters evolve in realistic ways. Taryn starts off as a whiny kind of teenager. I guess he might even be preteen. I forget the exact age he is, but he definitely becomes a full responsible man by the end of the series. And again, he's this whiny little kid dreaming of adventure, almost like a Luke Skywalker, almost like any insert hero's journey here. And he's trying to look off to go on an adventure. He doesn't want to just sit here and raise this pig. He doesn't want to do this. He wants to go fight some war and just become a hero. And obviously, he bites off more than he can chew. By the 4th book, he discovers who he is. And that is the entire point of the 4th book. He goes on a journey of self-discovery, trying to get all kinds of jobs to see what role he can place in society. He works as a smith at a forge. He becomes a political mediator, a mercenary, a weaver, a clay shaper, and a whole lot more. And that novel hits hard for any teenagers who feel lost. This was a valuable lesson to learn as a kid reading this. And Taryn did okay at each of these things. He tried. He never excelled, but he showed enough promise that each of the people he meets would have willingly accepted him. The swordsmith was willing to train him. The Weaver was willing to train him. The king who he helps, or the, I don't know if it was the king, it might have been like a local lord. That's probably the best way to put it. Who he's helped mediate some issue with livestock. The Lord offers to reward him in a way that makes sense. And this is such a fundamental lesson about discovering our interests and accepting ourselves that I wish more books included things like this. I mean, I don't see modern books where a character goes out to try and find themselves. There's a lot of modern stories where a character, might have some fundamental flaw, and then they realize by the end of it that, hey, it's great that I have this flaw and it's not actually a flaw. But there are rarely books like this where a character goes out to explore what they can be and they try multiple different things. A lot of times the character might go on a journey to become a warrior or to become a wizard or to become, this specific thing or to own a bakery or something like that, where it is one task. But it's very rarely where every single chapter, couple of chapters is something completely different, where, you're hopping from becoming a master craftsman of one skill to another, to another, to another. And yeah, looking at it now, it is a little bit heavy-handed, but this is a book intended for kids or middle grade, if you will. And while it never outright said try a bunch of things to find what you're interested in, where you fit in, what you think, what you enjoy doing, and what you excel at doing, and that there is a difference between the two of those, it shows us what that can look like. And I can only imagine how this might influence a kid who wants to go on a journey to discover who their parents are following a similar path of Terran. Sorry, I forgot to mention the Terran is, of course, an orphan. This was, after all, a Disney movie, so it goes to imply that, that the hero is obviously parentless. But it is rare to see so many of those elements in modern stories. And could this be made today? Again, sadly, I don't think so. It has enough in it which should interest fans of fantasy, especially young readers. So if you're out there now and you haven't read the series, give it a try. And in fact, this was mine and billions of kids' gateways into the fantasy genre. And I picked this up in the early to mid 90s. Well, we'll say mid 90s then. Even so, I think it doesn't separate itself from most modern storytelling, or rather, it was too good at influencing everything which came after it. So now it's difficult to separate the Chronicles of Prydain from, modern children's, young adult, and epic fantasies. I mean, I can see similar story beats, even though everything else is completely different between this and, say, Percy Jackson or Harry Potter, or insert, child protagonist in a fantasy setting here. So what would it take to modernize this novel? I don't know. The prose is snappy and action driven. The characters are interesting in compelling ways to propel the story. The themes addressed span multiple potential reader pools. Like I've already mentioned, mid-teen, mid-grade, so young children and older children, teenagers, young adults. I believe this would cross over various genders, races, whatever. This feels like a very interesting book series for anyone to read. And the dialogue is quippy, and the characters have fun poking fun at each other. The first time Flunder Flam's heart breaks because he tells a lie, it's not entirely obvious what's going on, but come a couple of books later, they're like, the characters start looking at him weird, and they're like, are you sure that's what you meant when you said you were doing XYZ, or when you said such and such happened, or when you promised you would do something? And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. It's fine. When in fact, everyone is kind of laughing on the inside about, a compulsive liar given a harp of truth. And that humor is baked in even when they're facing dire circumstances. Again, I won't go into it, but part of the Disney went overboard in some of the trauma-inducing scenarios. So there were definitely a lot of kids who were scarred who watched the movie probably too young. And there are legitimate stakes within the series, even though it is mid-grade, where lives are at stake, where there are serious consequences for failing or for failing to act or for acting in the wrong way. And I think the biggest problem for publishing this novel today isn't any inherent weakness or issue in the Chronicles of Prydain. Rather, I think the problem is that the market is filled with too many novels and series that feel like this novel. They have these fantasy, epic fantasies with Celtic origins as the source material. And even within my own Into the Void series, I can see how the Chronicles of Prydain came through. And I don't write epic fantasy, but there are moments where the characters are trying to find themselves, similar to how Taryn tried different activities in Taryn the Wanderer, which is the fourth novel, which I already dove into. And I can see aspects of Gurgi within my non-human characters. I may not have a character like Flunar Flam whose heart breaks when he lies, but I do have plenty of characters and positions of power who stretch the truth to serve their own ends, and sometimes they get caught in their lies, sometimes they don't. So unfortunately, I think that Chronicles of Prydain captured lightning in a bottle, and it was published at the right time to inspire countless readers and authors, just like Dune. One of the reasons I decided to create this topic of could this be written today was to give ideas on how to distinguish our novels from the ones that inspired it. And for this series, the only advice I have to I don't know how I would modernize this series, but looking at it a different way, how can we tell our own stories, even if they are influenced by this, so that it stands out from what is crudely put, feels a little bit like a Lord of the Rings clone. And that's good advice in general. So we don't want to write another epic fantasy that's been done 1,000 times. So we want to be judicious in creating these big bad sources of evil who want to kill everyone in a given land. We can make our evil characters more unique, where they have a specific purpose, where they aren't just trying to do evil for evil's sake. And if we give those villains more depth, they'll stand out. And that can come in the form of actionable goals that are more than just take over the world for unknown reasons. I mean, the Chronicles of Prydain, the backstory is that there was a huge war years and years ago, and they temporarily defeated the evil within the land, and so it kind of went back. But now it's coming back, and it feels like that's the same. The same is true with Lord of the Rings. The same is true with the Young Merlin series that I often reference. That and this feel very similar. And if we have an actual evil villain or multiple villains who are driven for a specific purpose other than just take over the world, that can help it stand out. I don't think we should adjust our characters to be that different from these on a base level, because these are really well thought out and well created characters. So if the best advice I can give is that, if you want to model a character loosely off of these, make them dynamic, make them interesting, give them a personality so that way they can stand out. And that way, even if they are based on Terran, even if they're based on Ilamwi or Gurgi or Flundur Flam or Dalben or any of the other characters in the story, they can stand on their own because they will naturally change throughout our story in dynamic ways. And that way, even if they start in a similar place, they will end up somewhere completely different. And alternatively, we could just go for an entirely chaotic evil villain, such as Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight Returns, where it is somebody who absolutely is just chaos incarnate, where they want to do evil for evil's sake, but they aren't trying to take over anything. They're just trying to destroy the world. So that could also be another interesting take. And before we close out, I'm going to check in on the on everything. Yeah, I also still play video games from the previous century. Yes, I was quite the nerd as a kid. That goes without saying. Yeah, that seems fair. Although to be fair, I started playing Grand Theft Auto at maybe 15. I'm pretty sure I wasn't able to drive before I picked up the first copy, so it might have been 4. No, Grand Theft Auto was PS2. I had my first job to pay for my PS2, so I was definitely 15 when I got Grand Theft Auto. Always fun there. Yeah, we can save the old video games for another time. Interesting. So for 32 bucks, you can get that. 32 pounds, I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Oh yeah, there are a lot of really cool covers of these. I do like the hardcover where it's this glossy thing and shows this nice little battle scene. But I do think that I think there's a different cover with everyone sitting around a campfire, which has this really good group feel to it. And the thumbnail of this shows probably the one that you might picked up, that version of it. Yeah. Thank you for the background history, sweetie. So women couldn't own credit cards until the 1970s. Yeah, there was the all the movements in the 60s and 70s that led to great changes across the United States. No more than one parent. Yeah. Yeah. Even though that is the general rule, there is often zero parents in a lot of Disney stories, Disney heroes stories. Hey, Eva, thank you for joining in. I'm glad to see you are here. I'm mad where you're on a mad with the mad. Oh, that could that be Monkey Island? Because that was a lot of fun, and I did play that not as a kid. I just recently played that a few years ago. I bought the renewed version of it. So, with that out of the way, I'm very glad that all of you came in to join in. And honestly, if you want to talk Chronicles of Prydain at another point, let's go for it. So, with that, I am Ben Pick. Thank you for joining me in Running to Write. Next week's topic will be loosely based on the Olympics. It's going to be a little bit late. Well, I mean, it's going to be a regular time. It's going to be late in terms of the topic being about the Olympics when the Olympics finished, a couple of weeks ago at this point. But hey, better late than never. And I had a couple of interesting things to say about a couple of comparisons to make to the Olympics because I'm finally trying to do the running metaphors aspect of my tagline. With that out of the way, what are some of your favorite classics which you would like me to break down and think about what it would take to modernize them? I mentioned the Young Merlin series. I'm probably not going to do another epic fantasy. I might jump into science fiction if I come back to this series. If it does well, if you all like it, let me know what you think. I could do a couple of others. Yeah, I could jump over to some science fiction thing. I could jump over to some of the other books that I read as a kid. That could be a lot of fun. Anyways, I will see you next time. Until then, check out one of the fundamental series to forming my love of all things fantasy. I'll leave you with one additional thought in that I said this before, but Disney's adaptation of the Chronicles of Prydain, specifically, they did the Black Cauldron. It's a travesty of wasted potential. And it was quite violent for kids. So a lot of parents took their kids to the movie thinking, oh, it's cartoons for kids, whatever. That was a mistake. And, like I said, I turned out perfectly fine despite watching that movie as a kid, although I would have watched it as a kid on VHS release, not in the theaters because I'm not that old. But yeah, I would again love to see that movie rebooted instead of there's. I was just having a conversation about something else that was getting rebooted, which doesn't need another reboot. And yeah, I would much rather have failures like story. I would much rather have movies that failed that were based off of incredible IP or where the characters and directors or whomever just missed the mark. And I would much rather redo that than to have, I don't know, another Spider-Man retelling, or another superhero story, or another reboot of something that's already been done, or another Batman movie, because I keep thinking that's where my mind is right now. Anyways, Disney has a chance to make the Black Cauldron worthy of its name. And I really hope. Oh, sorry. The whole reason this topic came up is because Disney is considering making a live action remake that would basically be a washed out version or a kid's version of the Wheel of Time. And I really hope they don't go that route. I really hope they make, they could do it, but I want them to make it good, which I know is asking for a lot. Yeah. And with that, I will see you all next week. Have a wonderful night and consider reading the Chronicles of Prydain. Let's see. Disney has done so well. Yeah. Richard, you're just trolling at this point. As I usually say, the books are 99% of the time better than the movie. Yeah. Ooh. Goonies reboot. I have feelings about that. I think the Goonies is flawless. I think the Sandlot is flawless. I'm a Maggie Ward. Thank you for joining in. Oh yeah, of course. I 100% agree with you. The live action Disney movies are 100% exploitive and obvious money grabs to maintain their IP. So they are creatively devoid. They are devoid of any creativity. Oh boy. Yeah. Magic Treehouse Show would be fun, or reboot Magic School Bus. I would love to see a modern, Miss Frizzle or whatever. And with that, I am heading off to dinner, so I will see you all later. Have fun.